shooting and looting, no blood on the street, no people in danger, no repressing on me. So give me my rights and let me be free. It's going on worldwide. Give me my rights now. Human rights.
Today,
Give me my rights.
very critical and frankly quite sobering task.
Yeah.
We're diving into a significant stack of source material about the ongoing human rights crisis in Ethiopia.
Yeah, it's a tough topic. We're talking about a nation, with such incredible history, amazing cultural diversity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But one that's currently facing really profound instability.
And it's crucial to grasp the scale right from the start. The sources we've looked at, they really emphasize this. Since around 2018, but especially between 2020 and 2024, Ethiopia became one of the world's absolute epicenters for conflict and internal displacement. The numbers involved are just staggering.
That context is key, isn't it? It underlines the urgency. So our goal today is to kind of unpack this, distilling the core findings from our sources into, let's say, 5 major interconnected themes.
Right. We're looking at conflict abuses and potential war crimes, then suppression of civic space, basically silencing dissent.
Okay. Then there's the systematic use of sexual violence, which is horrific.
Deeply disturbing. And tied into that is the sheer scale of the humanitarian crisis, the displacement.
And finally, the 5th point, which seems to tie it all together, this problem of weak accountability, or perhaps impunity.
Exactly. We're not just recounting events. The sources really dig into the sort of structural issues, the failures that allow these things to happen again and again.
Okay, let's unpack this then. I think we have to start at the beginning, really, with the violence that sort of set the stage for this recent wave, the conflict abuses linked to the war that broke out in November 2020.
That war, primarily between the federal government and the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, it was brutal.
And even though there was a peace agreement, the sources are very clear, aren't they? The violence hasn't stopped. It's just shifted.
Precisely. It shifted focus, perhaps, but it continues intensely in regions like Amhara and Oromia. That's a key point from the material.
And the sources, they're careful to point out, this isn't one-sided, right?
That's critical. The documentation we reviewed points to severe abuses committed by all major parties involved. We're talking federal forces, regional forces like the Amhara Special Forces, various allied militias, and insurgent groups, too.
It's a complete breakdown.
A tragic breakdown of law and order across large areas, yeah.
Could you maybe give us a bit more detail on the specific types of abuses? Because abuses is such a broad term, and the reports were quite specific and, frankly, horrifying.
Sure. The reports meticulously document patterns of really grave actions, things that likely constitute war crimes under international law. This includes large-scale extrajudicial killings, often appearing ethnically targeted, enforced disappearances, especially after military operations sweep through areas. Systematic torture inside detention centers is widely reported.
And attacks on civilians.
Yes, and specifically targeted attacks on civilian infrastructure. Things like hospitals, clinics, farms, water sources deliberately destroyed or looted, making life impossible.
There was one thing the sources really highlighted as a structural failure, almost a tactic. The use of starvation. It wasn't just a side effect of fighting, was it?
No, not at all. The material strongly suggests starvation was used strategically as a tool of war. It wasn't just, collateral damage.
How so? What does that mean in practice?
Well, reports detail the deliberate blockading of food aid and medical supplies, obviously, but also the weaponization of essential services. For instance, shutting down banking and telecommunications in Tigray for extended periods.
Ah, right. So people couldn't get money, even if families sent it?
Yeah.
Aid agencies couldn't operate.
Exactly. It cripples the humanitarian response, yes, but it also directly impacts families' ability to survive. It's starvation engineered not just through physical blockades, but through economic and communication denial, too.
That's a crucial detail, the mechanics of it, often missed in headlines.
It really is. And the combined impact, the direct violence, the engineered starvation, our sources indicate this has contributed to hundreds of thousands of deaths, direct and indirect, and displaced millions more.
It puts it into perspective. This is undeniably one of the most severe crises we've seen in Africa in recent memory.
Without a doubt.
So the physical conflict is one huge piece. But the sources also show how this period was used to, well, clamp down on any form of dissent. Which brings us to that second theme, the shrinking space for civic society. There were initial promises of opening up, right? Media freedom, democratic reforms. What happened?
Well, the documents show a pretty clear pattern. Promises of reform were made, yes, but particularly when civil unrest flared up, or during active conflict, the response shifted dramatically towards repression.
How did that repression manifest itself?
Across the board, really. Mass arrests, often without clear charges or due process. Journalists, human rights defenders, activists, especially those covering sensitive issues like ethnic conflict or government abuses, frequently detained.
And restrictions on basic rights.
Severe restrictions on freedom of assembly, on protests, and a key tactic highlighted again and again is the shutting down of internet and mobile communications.
Ah, the communication blackouts again.
Exactly. Often implemented during periods of unrest in specific regions, like Amhara and Oromia, sometimes lasting weeks or even months.
And the goal there seems pretty clear.
You have to assume the intention is twofold. One, impede the ability of activists and communities to organize or share information. And two, critically, make it much, much harder for journalists, human rights monitors, or even just ordinary people to document and report abuses as they're happening.
So it's not just a byproduct of chaos, it's arguably a deliberate strategy to prevent accountability.
That's certainly the implication drawn from the patterns described in the reports.
We're reading about large-scale security sweeps, mass detentions, particularly in Amhara and Oromia. What's the bigger picture consequence of all this for, say, justice or accountability?
Well, think about it. If you systematically target and detain the people who are supposed to be watchdogs, journalists, lawyers, activists, often holding them without charge, without access to legal help, you effectively silence civil society.
You remove the checks and balances.
Precisely. The space for independent voices shrinks dramatically. And the result? Public accountability becomes incredibly difficult. If those eyes and ears on the ground can't operate freely, how can abuses, whether by state or non-state actors, be reliably verified? Victims lose their primary avenues for seeking help or justice locally.
That link between shutting down communications and enabling impunity is just stark. Let's move to another deeply disturbing element that the sources document across all the conflict zones, the systematic use of sexual and gender-based violence.
This is perhaps the most harrowing aspect detailed in the source material. The evidence gathered from survivor testimonies, from humanitarian groups, medical reports, it confirms the widespread and systematic use of sexual violence.
And we're talking about rape, gang rape.
Rape, gang rape, sexual slavery, forced marriage, forced pregnancy, often directed at women and girls, and frequently targeting specific ethnic groups.
And the sources emphasize the intent behind this. It's not portrayed as random acts of wartime brutality, is it?
No. The reports consistently describe it as being used strategically, as a weapon.
A weapon for what purpose?
To inflict maximum psychological terror, to force populations to flee, to deliberately break down social cohesion, family structures, and, quite pointedly, as a form of punishment against ethnic communities perceived as supporting opposing sides. It's violence used for ethnic and political retribution aimed at the most vulnerable.
And where is this happening? Is it just on the front lines?
No, it's pervasive in conflict-affected areas. The reports document it in Tigray, Amhara, Oromia, wherever the conflict has touched. And crucially, it's not just on active battlefields. It's reported in areas under military control, in unofficial detention sites, and horrifyingly, even within camps for internally displaced people, the IDP camps.
Inside the camps,
Yeah.
where people have fled for safety.
Yes, which highlights the extreme vulnerability and lack of protection even for those who have escaped the fighting.
That leads us directly into the sheer scale of the displacement crisis, the humanitarian catastrophe. The sources mention Ethiopia's system of ethnic federalism, which was designed, I suppose, to give regions autonomy, has sometimes actually made things worse. How does that work?
It's a really important structural point raised in the analysis. The argument is that by basing administrative regions primarily on ethnicity, disputes over vital resources, things like land, water, grazing rights, regional boundaries, often become instantly politicized along ethnic lines.
So local disputes escalate quickly.
They can escalate very quickly into deeply entrenched ethnic conflicts, especially when central government control weakens or is contested. These identity-based rivalries flare up, sometimes violently, driving mass displacement.
And the scale of that displacement, it's hard to comprehend.
It truly is. We're talking about millions of internally displaced people, IDPs, entirely dependent on aid, often living in makeshift shelters, overcrowded camps.
With basic necessities lacking.
Severely lacking. The reports detail chronic shortages of adequate shelter, clean water, sanitation. Food insecurity is rampant, made worse by recurring droughts in some areas.
And access for aid agencies is still a problem.
A major problem. Ongoing insecurity, bureaucratic hurdles, sometimes deliberate restrictions on humanitarian access. It all means that even basic life-saving aid, food and medical supplies, often struggles to reach the people who desperately need it, which predictably leads to preventable deaths from disease and malnutrition.
Okay, so we've seen this devastating picture across these key areas. Conflict abuses, the silencing of dissent, weaponized sexual violence, a massive humanitarian crisis. And yet it continues. This brings us to that fifth crucial point from the sources, the profound lack of accountability. Why does this cycle persist?
Yeah, this is perhaps the most frustrating and critical piece of the puzzle. Impunity. It seems to be the great enabler.
Despite vast amounts of documentation from the UN, NGOs, journalists, local groups, the sources suggest that perpetrators, regardless of their affiliation, have largely faced no real consequences. On all sides, the sources stress.
On all sides, yes. That's consistently highlighted.
Transitional justice is supposed to address this, but the reports point to major roadblocks. What are the key barriers preventing even basic accountability?
Our analysis of the sources points to a few major interconnected obstacles. First, there's a question mark over the genuine independence of domestic courts and investigative bodies. Concerns about political influence are frequently raised.
Okay. Lack of judicial independence. What else?
Second, there seems to be consistent political pressure that prioritizes perceived short-term stability or military goals over the much harder, longer-term work of justice and reconciliation. Justice is often seen as destabilizing in the short run.
Right. Stability over accountability, a common dilemma. And the third obstacle involves the international community.
Yes, and this is a really significant point emphasized in the materials. It's the resistance to and ultimate termination of key international investigation mechanisms. Specifically, the sources note Ethiopia's successful diplomatic efforts to end the mandate of the UN's International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia, ICHRI.
And what did ICHRI do?
It was the main independent body set up by the UN Human Rights Council to investigate alleged violations by all parties. Shutting it down essentially closed the door on the most credible path for impartial international investigation and accountability at that time.
That's deeply concerning. So if international mechanisms are blocked and domestic ones are seen as compromised, what does that mean for the future? What are the long-term consequences for that stability the government supposedly wants?
Well, the direct consequence, according to the analysis, is that impunity becomes entrenched. And when there's no accountability, it fuels cycles of revenge, deepens mistrust between communities, and basically lays the groundwork for future conflict.
Because grievances are never addressed.
Exactly. Victims feel unheard, abandoned. Any peace achieved without addressing past wrongs is likely to be incredibly fragile. Built on sand, as the saying goes.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, 5 really critical interlinked areas: the horrific conflict abuses, the deliberate shrinking of civic space, the systematic sexual violence, the enormous humanitarian crisis, and this pervasive impunity. It seems clear from these sources that Ethiopia is at a really critical juncture.
It really is, and the conclusions drawn from the source material generally converge on a few key things needed to move towards any kind of sustainable peace.
What are those?
First, genuinely inclusive political dialogue. That means involving all significant regional and ethnic stakeholders, not just the main political players in Addis Ababa. Second, establishing credible accountability mechanisms, ways to actually address past and ongoing violations.
Accountability is key.
Absolutely. Third, ensuring immediate and unrestricted humanitarian access to all areas in need. And fourth, actively working to reopen and strengthen that independent civic space, allowing media, NGOs, and activists to operate freely.
Right, rebuilding what's been dismantled.
Precisely. Because ultimately the consensus in the material is that lasting peace can't just be about political deals. It requires both justice and reconciliation, processes that need to happen together.
It leads to a final difficult question for you, the listener, doesn't it? Building on what we've discussed from the sources.
Yeah, something to really mull over. If a country facing such serious allegations can successfully push back against international accountability mechanisms, citing sovereignty, how does the global community balance the responsibility to protect human rights with the diplomatic realities and the potential risks of intervention or pressure?
That tension between national sovereignty and universal accountability, especially when justice seems so essential for real long-term stability, that's the difficult tightrope the world has to walk here, something to keep thinking about.